Today I have for you two incredible games of chess played by a 12-year-old prodigy, possessing an attacking ability the likes of which have rarely, if ever, been seen in the whole history of chess. Now some of you might already know who I'm talking about here, but before I say his name, let me first quickly tell you what you're about to see him do. In the first game, this young attacking genius goes on a sacrificial rampage, throwing everything he has at his opponent's king, calculating like a future world champion, and then flawlessly executing a forced mate in 7 moves. Game number 2 is even more incredible. In this one, he takes down the 50th best player in the world, again with a brilliant sacrifice that is powerful enough to end the game after only 21 moves. So who is this magical and maniacal young attacking genius? Well, it's none other than the legendary future world champion himself, Mikhail Tal, playing a couple of his very first recorded games ever in the year 1949. In this game number 1, he's up against the 15-year-old Josef Israel Zilber from Latvia, who would go on to become a chess legend himself, peaking out at number 91 in the world by age 30, according to chess metrics. In his late 40s, Zilber immigrated to the United States, fell on hard times, and then became one of the most well-known homeless chess hustlers in New York's famous Washington Square Park. So it sounds like he had a very interesting life, and maybe one that I'd like to cover in more detail in a future video, but for now, I want to get right into this first game. The 12-year-old Mikhail Tal is playing white, and he opens with e4. Zilber replies e6, the French defense, and after the standard moves d4 and d5, Tal plays knight to d2, the Tarrasch variation, putting his knight on a less active square than on the more standard c3, while blocking his dark squared bishop, but this leaves his c-pawn free to support his center with the move c3, as well as discourages any bishop to b4 from black, pinning his knight to his king. Zilber responds with the very strong and very popular c5, hitting the white center now with a second pawn. Tal replies e takes d5, and after queen takes d5, he could now rid himself of his twice attacked d-pawn with the move d takes c5, but all this would really do is help black get another piece into the action after the bishop recaptures. Tal knows his opening theory, and instead plays the much more popular knight g to f3. Adding defense to the pawn, preventing queen takes d4, and if c takes d4, then he's got bishop to c4 with tempo on the queen, when white is the one jumping ahead in piece development. So that's nothing for black to get too excited about, although c takes d4 has been the main line here ever since Tarrasch himself first popularized this variation back in the 1890s. But Zilber decides to play the less common alternative, knight to c6. Just increasing pressure on d4, and maybe trying to get Tal away from his memorized opening book moves. We do have bishop to c4 attacking that queen, who scurries on over to h5, and if you're wondering if that's the best square for the queen, well, it's not. The vast majority of great players, past and present, have preferred moves like queen to d8 or even queen to d7, and here Stockfish is already starting to salivate over a pawn sacrifice with g4. Since after queen takes g4, white gets to harass the queen further with rook to g1 while activating another piece. But Tal goes for d takes c5, since after bishop takes c5, he's got knight to e4, hitting the bishop. And if it were to move, then the knight could just come into d6 with check. That would favor white. So since the bishop is defended by the queen, Zilber correctly determines that it's best to just develop another piece and plays knight g to e7. Unfortunately, that's the wrong square for the knight. But it's easy to see why he played it. He's fixated on the move knight to d6 check, to which he's planning to respond bishop takes d6, and after the queen recaptures, he can just castle, since the knight on e7 is blocking the white queen's view of f8. But what he should be more concerned about is the threat to his bishop on c5, which is why knight to f6 was the correct move, challenging its attacker right away. Now the most crushing move for white here would be g4, and after queen takes g4, attacking the knight on e4, also eyeing the undefended bishop on c4, white has queen to e2, defending both, leaving black's bishop still under attack while also threatening rook to g1 followed by rook takes g7. So not good times at all for black here. Tal didn't play this in the game though. He went for bishop to g5, which is also quite strong, blocking the black queen's defense of that bishop on c5, although this does allow black to counterattack with h6, which would be his best try here, but Zilber plays queen to g4, counterattacking the knight on e4 instead. Tal defends with queen to d3. He's not afraid of any knight to b4 attacking his queen, since that would run black into big trouble, or should I say bigger trouble, after the move bishop to b5 check. Zilber knows this, and so continues b6, defending his bishop. Tal castles, so does Zilber, but now we have a blunder by the young Tal, who fails to find his best move, which is h3, attacking the black queen, which one way or another is gonna get trapped. If queen takes g2, then rook d to g1 is pretty straightforward, and if queen to h5, you got g4, queen to g6, and then knight to h4. Now I should mention, in case anyone's wondering, that rook to d8 here would run into a checkmate in 2, starting with queen takes d8 check. Now black can throw in knight to e5, hitting white's queen that way, but after queen to e2, he's just finished. His attacked queen has nowhere to run. So I don't know if Tal just totally missed this or if he miscalculated something, but let's take a look at what happened in the game. Tal misses his most decisive move h3 and instead goes for bishop to f6, which is a tricky way to get the bishop out of the view of the black queen while getting it trained on that g7 square, since if black captures it, then knight to f6 check of course wins black's queen due to the fork. Now if black addresses that with a move like king to h8, then the bishop can drop back to c3, maintaining its view of g7 with some promising attacking potential. Unfortunately for Tal, however, Zilber now finds the move queen to f4 check, and after king to b1, played by Tal, Zilber is now able to safely pick up the bishop as he now does with g takes f6, when there is no knight fork and he is simply winning. Did Tal just totally miss this move queen to f4 check? Well, weirder things have happened, but maybe he didn't. I suspect that he may have purposely sacrificed his bishop on f6 in order to get some dangerous activity, beginning with g3, driving the black queen to h6, which is the safest square, maintaining defense of f6, but now here comes the g-pawn to g4, ready to push to g5 and try to open up a file to the black king. Looks kind of scary, but black is still totally fine after playing something as simple as bishop to b7, and if g5, f takes g5, and let's say knight e takes g5, white just doesn't have anything. Black has all kinds of winning moves here, like rook a to d8, hitting the white queen, and after queen to e2, there's rook takes d1 check, rook takes d1, and then knight to d4, looking to trade more pieces, when the black king is totally safe and can go to h8 at a moment's notice. But this is of course all very easy with the help of an engine when you're sitting across the board from this young attacking maniac, looking at this position and trying to navigate the path of least resistance to that full point. It's not so easy. Zilber decides to play queen to f4, which is still winning, although unnecessarily cautious. But he's thinking that after Tal's next move, which is of course g5, he can play f takes g5, and after knight f takes g5, he's got knight to g6, blocking the g-file, when the black queen is defending against knight to f6 check, which wouldn't be the case if it were still on h6. The black queen is also well positioned to thwart any attempt by white to go after the h7 pawn with the move queen to h3, since then he'd have the move queen to h4 to block. So Zilber still has everything under control, but Tal is just going to keep creating fresh problems for his opponent to solve. And the next one is h4, looking for h5 to drive that knight off of g6, and it's at this moment that Zilber starts to drift. Simplest for black here is to just play rook to d8, attacking the white queen, followed by the trade of rooks on d1, then he can kick the knight off of g5 with the move h6, play king to h8, and Bob's going to be someone's uncle very soon. In the game, however, Zilber takes a different approach with knight to b4. Okay, he's attacking the white queen. Now best for white would be queen to e2, threatening queen to h5 and then checkmate on h7. But Tal goes for the inferior queen to h3. And when I say inferior, that of course means it loses more quickly to an infallible engine, but against a human, it just might be a good practical decision, since it throws out a little worm on a hook, baiting Zilber into playing e5 with a discovered attack on the white queen. But this one move threat turns out to be a decisive mistake, as it opens up the c4 bishop's eyes to the f7 square, something which is going to become very significant in just a few moves. Tal now plays queen to g2, which is excellent, getting opposite the black king, threatening h5, and if the knight moves off at g6, then he'll have a deadly discovered check, which is why the move knight takes h4 here is impossible. White would just respond rook takes h4, followed by knight to e6 check. So best for black in this position would probably be king to h8, just getting off of that file. This wasn't played in the game, but after knight takes f7 check and then rook takes f7, white is practically back in the game due to black's very weak back rank, which can be exploited with rook to d8 check at the right moment. The engine is saying to start with the move h5, and if the knight moves, which it shouldn't, then white has the open g file to work with, and things are about to get really nasty really quick for Team Black. But getting to what was played in the game, in this position, after queen to g2, where Zilber, to his credit, does correctly conclude that he's going to need to give back some material. Unfortunately, he chooses the wrong way to do it with the move bishop to f5, adding some defense to his knight on g6, while increasing pressure on the knight on e4. Tal plays his h5, attacking the g6 knight, which again, if it were to move, white would have the deadly discovered check, so Zilber puts his king on g7, where he believes it to be a bit safer, being no longer subject to any knight to f6 check, also adding some defense to g6. But after h takes g6 from Tal, he's got a big problem, a losing problem. Tal is now threatening to come into h7 with his rook, which would end the game very quickly, since where is the black king going? Back to g8 so it can be checkmated by knight to f6? Nope, can't allow that. Now could it be that Zilber was initially planning to play bishop takes g6 here, adding defense to h7? I suppose it's possible, but even this fails to rook takes h7 check, since after bishop takes h7, there's knight to e6, discovered check, winning the black queen. So what's tried in the game, after h takes g6, is the move h6, just desperately trying to keep that h-file closed. Now white can actually win here with rook takes h6, since if king takes h6, then queen to h1 check will force mate in a fairly elementary fashion, which I'll leave for you to work out if you'd like. But Tal goes for bishop takes f7, which is also crushing, still threatening that rook takes h6 move, while offering Zilber some material, which he now accepts with rook takes f7. Now, if Tal were to recapture with the knight, then he'd lose his knight on e4 along with the game. So he plays the correct move, g takes f7, allowing his knight on g5 to be captured instead with h takes g5. But after knight takes g5, Tal is threatening both a double discovered check with knight to e6, as well as the capturing of the undefended rook on a8. It's not looking too great for Team Black here, but Zilber does have a little trick up his sleeve with the move queen takes f2, just offering Tal that whole castle here on a8. And this is a tactically instructive moment. What would you play here as white? And be honest, the material count is roughly equal, so would you succumb to the temptation to grab that free rook with queen takes a8, while threatening checkmate in 2 beginning with queen to h8 check? And if not, why not? What exactly can black do about that? Pause the video and see if you can spot the winning sequence for black in this position that caused Tal to reject this variation. If you said queen takes c2 check, then you're on the right track. But after king to a1, what's the follow-up for black? Well, here we have a beautiful and well-known mating pattern beginning with queen to b1 check, defended by the bishop, so rook takes b1 is forced, but now there's knight to c2, known as a smothered checkmate, as the white king is boxed in by his own pieces. So Tal apparently saw this coming, and or saw that he had a checkmate of his own in the game, where after queen takes f2, he plays the correct move, knight to e6, double discovered check. So the black king must move, and this is actually a checkmate by force in another 7 moves, which Tal is about to execute flawlessly. Now here black only has 2 legal moves. If king to f6, then rook to h6 check, mates in 5. When trying to hide on e7 doesn't help in view of the move queen to b7 check. So Zilber's king takes f7 is really the best try, but Tal has it all worked out. He plays queen to g7 check, offering the knight on e6, which Zilber accepts, since king to e8 would run into checkmate on the next move. So after king takes e6, black now has 3 whole pieces for his rook, So 4 pawns worth of extra material, but after rook to h6 check, that's about to change, since black's only legal move here is to throw his bishop in the way with bishop to g6, and from here it's mate in 5, with queen takes g6 check, king to e7, rook to h7 check, king to f8, queen to g7 check, king to e8, queen to d7 check, king to f8, and rook to h8 checkmate. I love it. And it's amazing to see Tal's signature playing style already pretty much fully intact. Of course, he's going to get a lot stronger, but we're already seeing him do exactly what he's famous for, sacrificing his pieces, and even when it's not objectively sound, the resulting complications are just way too much for his opponents to deal with. Let's move on to game 2. This is actually the first game on record that Tal ever played. Again, it's from the year 1949, he's 12 years old, and he's playing in a simultaneous exhibition given by a world-class 24-year-old master by the name of Ratmir Kolmov, who at the time of this game is ranked by chess metrics as being somewhere around the 50th best player in the world. So the 12-year-old Tal, being a complete unknown at this point, is about to give this elite player quite a shock, with the black pieces no less. So let's dive right in. Kolmov is playing white and begins this milestone of a game with the move c4, the English opening. Tal responds e6, known as the Agincourt defense, and after knight to c3, d5, d4, and c6, the position has transposed into a semi-Slav structure. Play continues down a very well-trodden opening path with knight to f3, knight to f6, bishop to g5, and now d takes c4. This is known as the semi-Slav accepted. Tal is grabbing a pawn here at the cost of giving up his strong pawn on d5, thus allowing Kolmov to achieve an uncontested ideal pawn center now with his move e4, with a discovered attack on that c4 pawn, which Tal now defends with b5. Next is e5, by far the most popular and strongest move in the position, attacking the pinned knight on f6, which would be completely losing for black if not for the move h6, counterattacking that bishop. And this is still very well known theory. By far the most popular thing for white to do now is to play bishop to h4, maintaining the pin and forcing black to play g5, after which the main line goes knight takes g5, h takes g5, and bishop takes g5, when white's going to get his piece back by picking up that still pinned knight on f6, with perhaps a slightly better position. Or perhaps not, it's all very theoretical, but this is the line that's widely considered to be best for white. Kolmov avoided this main line theory though, and in the game, after h6 from Tal, decided to just capture on f6 with his bishop. This is not considered to be very good for white, since after g takes f6 and e takes f6, if black were to capture on f6 with the queen, he'd have a significant advantage with his extra pawn and the bishop pair, for which white's compensation is not nearly sufficient. But Tal waits on capturing the pawn and instead plays bishop to b4, which is a bit odd, pinning the knight for the moment, not really threatening anything, but I think he's decided that he doesn't want that knight to get to e4, as evidenced by how he proceeds after bishop to e2, queen takes f6, and after Kolmov castles, unpinning his c3 knight and so making possible the move knight to e4, Tal now prevents that by just capturing the knight, giving up his bishop pair. Was it worth it? Probably not, since the move knight to e4 wouldn't have really been particularly dangerous, but okay, we have b takes c3 and knight to d7, when white has some decent compensation for his pawn deficit, and so is actually the preferred side. Next is a4, a very good move, with the idea of playing knight to e5 next. But after Tal's response bishop to b7, white's best way to maintain his advantage is to play knight to d2, followed by bishop to f3, getting his bishop active on the long diagonal. But here Kolmov fails to realize that after Tal's bishop to b7, his knight to e5 idea isn't really working, and so he just plays it anyway. We have knight takes e5, d takes e5, and queen takes e5, after which Kolmov has sacrificed a second pawn. He does now have bishop to f3, dominating the long light square diagonal, pinning the pawn on c6 to the undefended b7 bishop with the idea of capturing on b5. And if black were to passively defend with something like a6, just trying to bolster his pawn structure, then white can get some dangerous activity with rook to e1, hitting the queen, and after, let's say, queen to c7, there's bishop to h5, pinning the f-pawn, threatening rook takes e6 check. And you can explore white's possibilities further on your own if you'd like, but the engine is giving total equality here, which gives you a pretty good indication of how bad black's position is, since he is 2 pawns up in material. But this isn't what happened in the game. Tal, as a result of his move bishop to b7, is now able to play rook to d8, hitting the white queen, who goes to c2, but now here comes rook to d3, an excellent move, but maybe not for the reason you think. Kolmov goes ahead with his a takes b5, attacking the pinned c6 pawn twice, and how do you think Tal responds? Pause the video and see if you can find black's best move in the position. The winning move, now played by Tal, is not rook takes c3 or queen takes c3, both of those moves are losing. It's actually a wonderful exchange sacrifice with rook takes f3. Now if g takes f3, then there's rook to g8 check, king to h1, and c5, threatening bishop takes f3 checkmate. If queen to d1, adding defense, then there's queen to f4, adding a second attacker, to which there is no defense. The engine is giving a mate in 6 here, suggesting the desperado queen to d7 check for white. So in the game, Kolmov, seeing that the rook on f3 is off limits, plays the only reasonable alternative, rook takes a7, attacking the bishop on b7. But now here comes queen takes b5, defending the bishop, and so threatening to play something like rook back to d3, just winning a piece. So what Kolmov needs to play here is rook takes b7. That way after queen takes b7, he can take the rook on f3. Now there is rook to g8 check, forcing his king to h1, and then c5, threatening queen takes f3 checkmate. White can defend with either queen to e4 or queen to e2, both of which are losing. When black has the extra pawn, the much better pawn structure, more active pieces, and a safer king. But in the game, after Tal's queen takes b5, Kolmov commits a horrific blunder with the move g takes f3, giving Tal a mate in 5, with queen to g5 check, king to h1, and rook to g8. At which point Kolmov resigns the game, seeing that there will be no defense against checkmate on g2 except for rook to g1, allowing checkmate on g1. So what a marvelous way for the 12-year-old Mikhail Tal to make his first dent in the chess universe, taking down a world-class opponent twice his age in only 21 moves. So that's it for now. Let me know what you thought of these 2 games in the comments. Consider subscribing to the channel if you enjoyed this, and don't forget to hit that bell so you're notified of all my future content. Hit that like button as well if you liked the video. That always helps support the channel, and I will see you soon.